November 18, 1958, 11:42 p.m. Footsteps stalled beneath the stairwell. A case shifted once, and someone realized the weight was wrong. The stairwell had a habit of swallowing sound. That was why Bumpy Johnson chose it. He stood at the top step and listened, not for voices, for the lack of them. The building settled the way old buildings do, with small shifts that sounded like thought. He placed his hand on the rail. The wood was smooth where others had leaned without permission. The case rested beneath the last step. Not hidden. Not guarded. Just there. It was heavier than it needed to be. Anyone who lifted it would feel that immediately, weight without explanation. The latch was brass, dulled down to a tired yellow. The corners were scuffed not from travel but from waiting. This was the physical anchor of the night. It did not move. It did not speak. It did not threaten. A man with a mop came through too fast and caught his foot. The bucket rocked. Water sloshed. For a half-second the case could have slid into the open. That was the risk. Visible, brief. Enough. Bumpy did not react. He watched the man steady himself and keep walking, embarrassed by nothing he could name. The mop left a clean stripe across the floor, and the stairwell swallowed the sound again. Bumpy stepped down once, then stopped. He did not look at the case. He did not need to. He had already measured the distance between curiosity and consequence. It was short. He turned and left the building without escort. Harlem at night did not ask for one. The streetlights laid their halos like verdicts on the pavement. A car passed too close. Tires hissed. No one slowed. There was an internal deadline moving through him, quiet and fixed. Before the next collection cycle closed, this would be decided. Not tonight. Not loudly. The deadline was not about speed. It was about inevitability. The truth would choose where it wanted to sit. He met a lieutenant 2 blocks away. The man asked no greeting. He glanced back toward the building and asked what was under the stairs. Bumpy let the question hang. The lieutenant tried again, softer. Bumpy adjusted his cuff and said nothing. Silence settled between them and did the work of an answer. They separated without ceremony. Later, Bumpy passed the building again, this time from across the street. He paused long enough to see a shadow hesitate at the entrance. Not a face, not a name, just a delay. That was enough. He touched the rail inside with 2 fingers as he went by, a habit he would later drop. The case remained where it was, patient as a held breath. Someone would lift it, not because they were told to, because the weight would ask them to. Bumpy left Harlem that night knowing one thing with certainty. When you place a lie carefully, it tells you who believes it. By midnight, the stairwell learned the shape of the case. People passed it without stopping, but they adjusted their steps. A heel angled wider, a shoulder leaned away. The object changed traffic without moving. That was the point. Power that rearranged behavior did not need to announce itself. Bumpy did not return. He let distance do the watching. In another building, he sat with a glass he did not finish and listened to a radio he did not turn on. The internal deadline pressed without urgency. He did not think in hours. He thought in closures, when routes closed, when ledgers closed, when men closed their mouths because they had learned the cost of filling the air. The case would be opened by someone who believed weight meant value. That belief was common, useful. He had set it down knowing the city would provide the rest. A runner came with a message that was not a message. Someone had noticed the case. Someone had asked whose it was. Someone else had answered too quickly. Bumpy nodded once. He did not ask who. Names arrived late when they mattered at all. He stood and washed his hands. The sink coughed. The water ran brown, then clear. He dried carefully. The act mattered. Clean hands were not innocence. They were clarity. Across Harlem, the stairwell took on a smell of damp wood and soap. The light flickered once and steadied. A man stopped on the landing and bent, pretending to tie a shoe. He did not touch the case. He measured it with his eyes, the way men measure exits. He left with his not unfinished. Another man did lift it, just enough to feel the lie. He set it down again, slower. The sound of brass kissing concrete was soft, almost respectful. He backed away as if from an animal that had decided to sleep. Bumpy heard none of this. He did not need to. He understood how weight taught. Near dawn, a woman carrying groceries paused and frowned at the obstruction. She stepped around it and muttered about carelessness. Her complaint was clean. It wanted nothing. That mattered too. The deadline tightened, not like a clock, but like a room filling with smoke that no one could see yet. Before the next collection cycle closed, someone would claim knowledge they did not have. They would speak because the case suggested a story worth telling. Bumpy sat still and let the city do what it always did when offered an object and a rumor. He did not imagine the man who would open it. He did not picture hands or faces. Anticipation was a kind of waste. He spoke one line into the empty room, low and without audience. Leave it where it teaches. When he rose, it was not to intervene. It was to remove himself from the temptation to interfere. Control came from restraint. Judgment came from waiting long enough to be accurate. By morning, the stairwell would be ordinary again, or it would not. Either way, the case would have done its work. Bumpy walked out into the early light with certainty settled in him like a final answer. Whoever opened the case would do so believing they had found something, and that belief would tell him everything he needed to know. The latch gave a sound that was too small for what it promised. The man opened the case in a room that had learned not to remember faces. One bulb, one chair, a table with a split along the edge that never closed. He set the case down as if it might correct him. It did not. He expected money. Everyone did. What he found was order. Paper stacked clean enough to look intentional. A ledger turned face down, its spine unbroken, its pages too new for their reputation. An envelope without a seal. No names where names should be. No numbers where numbers would comfort. It was convincing in the way a lie becomes when it studies the truth. He did not smile. He did not curse. He breathed once through his nose and felt the weight shift from his hands to his chest. The danger had already passed. The risk now was interpretation. He told himself a story. That was the mistake. Later, in a back room behind a storefront that sold nothing you could carry, Bumpy Johnson arrived without announcement. No coat draped over shoulders. No men flanking him. He took the chair across from the case and sat as if time had been waiting for him to do so. The man began speaking before he was asked. He explained what the case meant. He explained who it pointed to. He explained how careful he had been. The words came out measured, practiced. He wanted credit for restraint. He wanted approval for caution. Bumpy listened. He did not interrupt. He did not nod. He let the story reach the end it had chosen. When the man finished, silence returned to the room and took up more space than the voice had. Bumpy reached forward and turned the ledger once so the cover faced up. He did not open it. He did not need to. He had already read the man. The internal deadline moved closer, not like a threat, but like a door closing softly behind them. "You chose the story," Bumpy said. The words landed without heat, cold enough to keep their shape. The man tried again. He adjusted facts that had never been facts. He added caution where there had been greed. He subtracted names to look loyal. Each change made the story heavier. Each sentence pulled him further from the truth he thought he held. Bumpy waited. When the man stopped, out of breath more from fear than effort, Bumpy closed the case himself. The latch met the brass with a final click that sounded like a decision. There was no warning, no instruction, no threat. Judgment did not require them. The pressure was now complete. By sunrise, the choice the man had made would harden into habit. He would either learn to live with silence or be undone by the need to explain himself again. Bumpy stood and straightened the chair he had not moved. He looked once at the closed case, now emptied of its invitation, and then at the man who still believed it had offered him something. He spoke one more line, low and exact. Weight teaches faster than words. Then he left the room as he had entered it, without hurry, without witness, certain that the case had already named its keeper, and that the man across the table was no longer him. He did not look back. The room stayed still after Bumpy left. Not quiet. Still. The man did not reach for the case. He kept his hands on his knees like they might betray him if given freedom. The bulb hummed. The split in the table seemed wider than before. Nothing had changed and everything had. He replayed the meeting and failed to find the moment where it went wrong. That was the second mistake. He believed there should have been a moment, a raised voice, a signal, a warning. Instead, there had only been space. Space for him to speak. Space for his story to expose itself. He stood and lifted the case again. The weight was familiar now, but different. It no longer suggested value. It suggested obligation. He set it back down and wiped his palms on his trousers. By the time he stepped outside, Harlem had begun its early movements, deliveries, keys turning, men pretending they had slept. No one looked at him twice. That cut deeper than suspicion would have. He carried the case through 3 blocks before stopping. He could feel eyes without seeing them, not watchers, witnesses. The city had a way of remembering choices even when it forgot names. He took the case to a room he trusted and did not open it. Trust had become fragile. He placed it under a desk and tried to sit. The chair refused to be comfortable. He stood again and paced, counting nothing, finishing no thought. The internal deadline tightened without announcing itself. He felt it as pressure behind the eyes, as a need to speak that had nowhere to land. He reached for a phone and stopped. He imagined explaining. He imagined clarifying. He imagined being believed. Each image ended the same way, with silence returning, heavier than before. Near dawn, he took the case back out. He opened it once more, slower. The contents did not change. That was the lesson he refused. He wanted revelation. The case offered only reflection. He found a scrap of paper and considered adding something. His own mark, a correction, a proof. His hand hovered and then withdrew. Even he could feel the danger in altering what had been designed to observe him. Across the city, Bumpy woke without an alarm. He washed his face and did not think of the man. The deadline had passed. That mattered more than outcomes. Decisions made under pressure showed their truth later. By morning, small errors began to surface around the man who had opened the case. Not accusations, not consequences yet, just misalignments. A door that should have been locked wasn't. A message delivered to the wrong desk. A pause before speaking that drew attention. He learned to shorten his sentences. He learned to stop offering explanations. He learned slowly that the case had not been bait for money, but for character. He returned it that afternoon, carrying it back to the stairwell beneath the building. He placed it where it had been. The latch was bent now, just enough to show use. He stepped away and felt lighter and worse. From across the street, unseen by him, Bumpy watched long enough to confirm the habit had begun. He did not approach. He did not reclaim the object. Ownership had already transferred in the only way that mattered. The confrontation was over. Truth had surfaced without a sound. The pressure question remained, unspoken and steady in the air between floors. Once you open what was meant to test you, can you ever put the weight down again? Bumpy turned away, certain of one thing: the case no longer needed him. After the case returned to the stairwell, the building forgot it again. Not completely. Enough. People stepped around it with less care now. Familiarity dulls edges. The brass latch caught the light and gave it back without interest. The bent corner marked it as handled. Used things attract less imagination. That was the final refinement. Bumpy did not go near it. He changed routes for a week, not to avoid eyes, to avoid influence. When an object finishes its work, the worst mistake is to keep touching it. He let the city carry the remainder. The man who had opened the case adjusted himself in small ways. He stopped arriving early. Early looked eager. He stopped staying late. Late invited conversation. He spoke only when asked, and even then he cut sentences short. He learned to let silence answer for him. Errors collected anyway. A payment delayed for no reason. A door unlocked when it should have been sealed. A glance held half a second too long. None of it rose to accusation. That was the pressure. Consequence without charge. The case remained beneath the stairs, heavier now because it no longer promised anything. Its weight was memory. Men knew it had been opened. They did not know by whom. That uncertainty did more work than exposure ever could. Bumpy heard the reports without asking for them. He listened without comment. His authority did not require maintenance. Judgment, once placed, was self-sustaining. One afternoon he stopped at the stairwell, not to look but to listen. The building carried a new sound, not footsteps, hesitation. People slowed as they passed. They measured the space as if it had learned to judge them back. He touched the rail and felt the smoothness again. He did not repeat the habit. He withdrew his hand and left. The anchor had become consequence. Presence had turned to residue. That night he spoke with a man who had not seen the case and did not need to. The conversation stayed on weather, on roots, on nothing that mattered. Halfway through, the man corrected himself on a detail no one had challenged. Bumpy noted it and let it go. Pressure spreads. The internal deadline was long past. What remained was pattern. Bumpy watched for it the way others watched for threats. Pattern revealed allegiance. Pattern revealed fear. The man who opened the case began to sleep poorly, not from dreams, from restraint. He had learned not to speak, and the discipline cost him rest. He woke before dawn and sat with the knowledge that silence had weight too. He did not complain. Complaints travel. Bumpy changed a habit then, a small one. He stopped correcting small lies. He let them stand and watched how men carried them. Some straightened under the load, some bent. None were surprised when consequences arrived. The case stayed where it was. No one moved it. No one claimed it. It belonged to the stairwell now, the way a mark belongs to a doorframe after years of hands. Bumpy walked past without looking and felt the certainty settle again. This was not about punishment. It was about instruction. The city learned what it was shown. The question pressed softly at the edge of everything, unanswered and steady. When weight teaches without force, who decides when the lesson is complete? The man stopped touching the case with his eyes. That was how Bumpy knew the lesson had settled. At first the stairwell had pulled attention the way a loose thread does. Now it repelled it. Men learned where not to look. That skill spread faster than gossip. It was quieter, more durable. The case remained beneath the stairs, unchanged except for the latch. Bent, permanent, a record without ink. The man who had opened it developed a new habit. He counted before speaking, not numbers, outcomes. He let others finish first. He allowed gaps to remain open. Silence, once a threat, became his shelter. He carried it carefully, the way some men carry faith without saying the word. Mistakes still happened. They always do. But now they happened around him, not because of him. That distinction mattered. He learned to accept blame without defense and credit without expression. He learned the posture of someone who could be trusted because he did not ask to be. Bumpy watched none of this directly. He observed through absence, through what did not escalate, through what did not need correction. Authority showed itself in the lack of emergencies. One evening a man suggested moving the case. It blocked the stairs, he said. Bumpy did not answer. The suggestion died where it was spoken. By morning the man apologized to no one in particular and did not repeat it. The case stayed. Another night someone joked about what might be inside. The joke fell flat. Humor requires permission. No one laughed. The man laughed alone and learned something about rooms. Bumpy adjusted nothing. He understood that consequence worked best when it was allowed to age. Fresh judgments invite argument. Old ones become weather. The case had become weather. The man who opened it began refusing certain opportunities. Quiet refusals, delays that felt reasonable. He did not explain why. Explanations create leverage. He felt lighter each time he declined. He felt watched less. That was the trade. Once he passed Bumpy on the street. They did not stop. They did not nod. They did not acknowledge each other. The space between them remained intact. That was intentional. Recognition would have cheapened the lesson. Bumpy noticed one change in himself. He listened longer than before, not because he needed more information, because patience sharpened judgment. He allowed conversations to drift past their useful points and observed who tried to rescue them. Rescuers revealed fear. The case endured. Dust gathered at its edges. Someone swept around it carefully. The broom did not touch. Respect does not require ceremony. It shows itself in avoidance. By the end of the week, the stairwell had returned to routine. People forgot why they had learned to step wide. They only remembered that it was wise to do so. That was enough. The man slept better. Not well, better. He woke before dawn and sat without reaching for anything. He had learned to live with an unanswered question. That skill kept him intact. Bumpy did not close the story. Closure invites review. He let it remain open in the only way that mattered, without motion. The pressure question stayed where it belonged, hovering without demand. When a lesson no longer needs reinforcement, does removing it weaken the truth or prove it? Bumpy walked on, certain of his answer, and did not share it. The stairwell stopped teaching out loud. That was how the end began. The case remained beneath the stairs, but it no longer pulled attention or bent traffic. People stepped around it without thinking. Habit had replaced awareness. The lesson had moved from the object into behavior. That was the signal Bumpy waited for. He came to the building alone in the late afternoon, not at night. Daylight stripped drama from everything. Judgment did not need shadows. The stairwell smelled of dust and old paint. The light held steady, no flicker, no warning. He stood at the top step and looked down, not at the case but at the space around it. Space tells the truth faster than objects ever do. The case looked smaller. Not lighter, smaller. Its presence had condensed. What once felt like a question now felt like residue. The latch, still bent, no longer announced use. It simply recorded it, a mark that would not be corrected. Bumpy rested his hand on the rail and felt the familiar smoothness. He noticed the habit rise and let it pass without completing it. That restraint mattered. He had learned something too. He did not touch the case. Touching would have meant ownership. Ownership would have meant continuation. The lesson was complete. Prolonging it would turn instruction into vanity. He stepped past and continued down the stairs. His foot did not hesitate. That mattered more than any signal he could have given. Outside, Harlem moved with its usual precision. Not calm, controlled. Men spoke in short exchanges. Women crossed streets with purpose. Cars double-parked and moved when asked. Nothing announced consequence. That was the success. Bumpy walked 3 blocks and stopped at a corner he had not used in years. He watched traffic pass and thought about absence. The ending of a story did not require removal. Sometimes it required leaving things exactly where they were and changing how they were seen. The man who had opened the case passed through the day without incident. That absence of incident was the consequence. He worked, he spoke when required, he listened more than before. No one tested him. No one rewarded him. Both were privileges he no longer needed. He noticed the case only once that day from a distance. He did not slow. He did not look twice. The object had lost its authority over him because it had already delivered it. That was the final transfer. Bumpy heard later that a newcomer had asked about the case. A simple question, curious, not dangerous. Someone answered with a shrug and said it had always been there. That answer ended the inquiry. History compresses quickly when it is allowed to. Bumpy did not correct the record. He understood that memory, once stabilized, did not need protection. Interference would reopen the question. Silence sealed it. That evening he changed one more habit, a small one. He stopped carrying a notebook he never wrote in. He left it behind and did not replace it. Objects had their seasons. When they outlived their use, keeping them was a kind of weakness. He sat with a drink he finished this time and listened to the city through the window. No radios, no reports, just sound. The rhythm told him enough. The internal deadline had long dissolved, not because it was forgotten, but because it had done its work. Deadlines mattered only until choice solidified. After that, they were just history. He spoke to no one that night. Across Harlem, the stairwell darkened as the light was turned off. The case disappeared into shadow, not hidden, just unlit. That distinction mattered. Bumpy knew he would not return to it again, not because it was dangerous, because returning would imply the lesson required confirmation. It did not. The question remained, steady and unanswered, not pressing now but settled into the walls of the city itself. When an object stops commanding attention, is it forgotten, or has it finally been understood? Bumpy did not answer it aloud. He never did. The aftermath did not announce itself. It never does. Days passed, then weeks. The stairwell remained ordinary. Ordinary was the proof. The case stayed beneath the stairs until one morning it was gone. No one marked the moment. No one asked who moved it. That absence mattered more than the object ever had. Removal without notice meant the lesson had migrated completely. Behavior held it now. Bumpy did not hear about the removal right away. When he did not react. Objects come and go, habits stay. The man who had opened the case was never named. Not officially, not privately. He was still present, still useful, still intact. He had learned the most expensive skill a man like him could learn, how to survive without visibility. He stopped reaching for advantage. That was the concrete consequence. A habit ended. He passed opportunities the way others pass stairwells, without thinking. He slept through the night more often than not. When he woke early, it was not from pressure, but from discipline settling into routine. Once someone pressed him for explanation, not accusation, curiosity. He answered with nothing that could be quoted. The conversation ended naturally. He was left alone. That was the reward. Bumpy observed the city from a distance he trusted. Fewer corrections were needed now. Fewer conversations required his presence. Authority had become ambient. It existed whether he stood nearby or not. He noticed something else. Men spoke less about outcomes and more about positioning. That shift mattered. It meant judgment was being anticipated, not feared. Anticipation breeds order. One evening, Bumpy walked past the building again without intending to. The stairwell was dark, empty. The space where the case had rested showed a faint outline like dust remembering shape. It would fade soon. That was fine. He did not stop. That was the ending. Not a confrontation, not a removal, just the absence of need. He returned home and sat without writing anything down. No notes, no records. The quiet aftermath required no archive. Its evidence lived in changed behavior and shortened sentences. The pressure question remained, as it always would, without demand or resolution. When judgment teaches without force, does it belong to the one who delivered it, or to the ones who changed because of it? Bumpy never answered. He did not need to. The city already had.